Hi friends, welcome back to Nobody Knows podcast, dedicated to the ones who are still trying to figure it all out in life. I hope you're doing well, and if this is your first time listening, hello, and thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Juliana, and I'm a 29-year-old who has consistently felt lost in life and like I've always been behind as I navigated my 20s. I created Nobody Knows to share my experiences and advice in hopes that we can relate to one another and to normalize that we're all just doing our best to find our way. We also have guests on here from time to time like we do today to spice things up with a different perspective, knowledge, and expertise of figuring it all out. If you have been loving this podcast, make sure you're following on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. And lastly, I would love your feedback for Nobody Knows podcast. And the best way to show your support is either through a 5-star review on either listening platform or writing to me directly on either Instagram at Nobody Knows Podcast and on TikTok at Nobody Knows Podcast, followed by an underscore. So picture this, you're at a holiday party where you only know the host, everyone else is a stranger to you, but that's okay because your goal for 2025 is to meet new people. Think about the top 5 questions you'd ask strangers at this party. Go ahead, list them out right now in your head. Do any of them involve asking about their career? Did you know that's like one of the first things we talk about with a complete stranger is what we do for work? When we do this, we may or may not realize, but we're indirectly communicating that our jobs make up one, if not the greatest value of our identity, to which we start down this path of figuring out what each other do so that we can determine who has the better job, makes more money, and has more quote-unquote status, so that in turn we establish who is more superior in the conversation. This song and dance is inevitable. It happens to all of us. It's learned behavior, and in a way, it makes us feel safe. But doesn't it get old? I certainly feel like it does, especially now that I'm unemployed. In the last few weeks, I've been faced with countless conversations where one of the first questions I'm asked is what I do for work. And since I don't have work right now, I remember the first time I stumbled terribly through my answer, feeling like I had to give an elevator pitch on the trauma I went through getting laid off, yet prove that it actually wasn't my fault. But I've grown to say now that I'm in between jobs and pivot the conversation to another topic. Our guest today, Jess Janz, has also been the victim of being asked pointless and at times insensitive questions that restrict rather than foster meaningful connection. Jess is a writer, community facilitator, and the creator of Dinner with Strangers, an innovative event series that brings together people from diverse walks of life to share stories over a meal. Her work explores identity, connection, and what truly binds us as humans. Because while figuring out our social hierarchy makes us feel safe, finding meaningful connection can also do the same. In 2017, she co-founded Dinner with Strangers, originally an intimate gathering of friends around a crock pot, but it quickly grew into a platform that fosters deep, meaningful conversations. After moving to San Francisco in 2018, working for a tech billionaire and refining her vision for community building, Jess returned to Toronto in 2020 to turn Dinner with Strangers into a full-fledged business. Since then, Jess has hosted 50 events, bringing together nearly 1,000 strangers, and recently expanded the brand to With Strangers, a company dedicated to events that spark intentional conversation. She's also working on her forthcoming book, The Table Where We Meet, which is based on the experiences and conversations at these dinners, and that is set for release in March of 2026. Jess's work has been featured in companies like Well Simple, Lululemon, and Staub, and her monthly writing workshops have built a thriving online community of over 70,000 people. Thank you so much, Jess, for being here, and welcome to Nobody Knows podcast. I'm really excited for us to chat today about how we can foster meaningful connections and also not always make it about our careers. We always start this podcast off with a question, and that question is, what are you currently figuring out in life? So this can be big, can be small, it can be related to your business or work related, or it can be personal. What is Jess figuring out right now?
My gosh, just starting out with like the easiest question of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many questions on the table right now. I mean, like how to slow down. I think this has been the craziest, wildest. I try not to say busy, like I don't glorify busyness, and yet it has been. I've been like accidentally a chicken with my head cut off for most of the year. Like there's just been so much in so many beautiful and wild ways, and at the end of such a crazy year and going kind of like, I feel like I have 2 brain cells left going like this isn't sustainable, and this also isn't how I want to feel in my life. And so I'm really doing some inventory right now. How do I keep my energy not spiking and dipping
Right.
and burning from both ends and running on fumes, and because I want to do this work for a really long time and I love the things that I do and I want to do a lot of things, but you can't do everything. And so I'm really obsessed right now with like figuring out, what does energetic sustainability look like? And what do I need to say no to so that I can say bigger yeses?
Totally.
It's funny, my work obviously centers around not talking about work, but I'm asking myself, like, what is my job for the next year? Because everything continues to change. So yeah, there's some big existential questions in my world. Also, just like, what are we doing about jeans these days? What are we doing about like being in my mid-30s and like what are clothes? Like, many things. Yeah. So all in all, we're asking a lot of questions.
And I love all the questions you're asking. You're asking a lot of like deep, profound questions, and I think jeans definitely fall in there because I'm feeling the same way as I'm wearing like literally a denim shirt this morning. But I feel like I've been looking online too, like I need to refresh my wardrobe, but I don't know what that entails. And that's really hard sometimes too.
It's just like, it's like we wore sweatpants for 2 years and then everything changed. And now I'm a millennial in my mid-30s, and like stores that I used to shop at don't cater to, like, they're not like selling to me anymore. And we're all just like, now low rise is coming back, and we thought that we solved that for the world. And like, there's just a lot happening. There's just a lot happening for us right now in the world,
for sure,
including just like, what pants are we wearing, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. I can definitely sympathize with that. I'm on TikTok on the trend of how to demillennialize my life. And like, I love it, but I also don't love it because there's beauty in being a millennial, and there's nothing wrong with being a millennial, but a lot of, I think, women our age are trying to like branch out and try new things and not stick to like what they're comfortable with. So I recommend going, if you're on TikTok, going down that rabbit hole, because you might get some ideas on jeans.
I wonder about that, of like unapologetically like owning, like I love being, I'm 34. I was so relieved to turn 30. I love being in my 30s. Also going, this relief of like, what is trends versus style, but then wanting to feel like it's fun to be, like, I like fashion and I like being involved in all that, you know, like keeping a finger on the pulse, and then realizing, like, in what ways is it like to whose standard and who is setting the standard, and is there something different for different ages, and does all of this make me sound really old? I don't know. So I don't know. I don't know. I could take a little deep dive and just sort of use some curiosity around that, of like, how much am I like comfortable being a millennial and like being unapologetic about that, and how much of it is like, okay, it's time to like, you know, there's so much that we can learn from people of all ages, both older than us and younger than us, that like, I think Gen Z is like, there's so much like unapologetic, like, I think like people, it's like self-expression that's happening. Like, kind of, I hope, body image crap that we grew up with in the early 2000s, that like seems like, I think Gen Z is like having conversations around that in a completely different way that I'm so inspired by, and so relieved that maybe that they're experiencing something different. So
For sure. Yeah, no, I highly recommend at least exploring that avenue on TikTok, because it definitely gets you thinking. But I am also of the mindset of like really celebrating just, this is who I am, and I am a millennial at heart, but I do enjoy exploring and branching out and finding new perspectives.
Totally.
So let's start at the beginning. Dinner with Strangers started in a hair studio with just 8 guests. Can you walk us through how the idea came to life and how it evolved into a larger event series?
Yeah, so my friend Ryan was my hairdresser. Hairdresser turned like soulmate friend very quickly. And
as they do.
As they do. He saved me from like a really horrible haircut. Like I just got like a total whack job.
Oh no.
Literally. Hack job? Hack job.
Yeah.
Just like really bad layers and like bad dye, like tiger stripes in my hair. So it was a bond through trauma immediately, and spent a long time in the chair also fixing this hair. So it was just immediate. We had 6 hours to fall in love. So we became fast friends, and he had attended a friend's dinner where she asked deep questions and everyone was part of the same conversation. And she was actually moving to New York. So he told me about this dinner and I was like, I want to do something like that. Like, how do we have deeper conversation? I'm like allergic to small talk.
Yeah.
And he also, as a hairdresser, found that like if people got on the subject of work, like they would end up like bitching about their jobs. And he was like, that's not interesting. Tell me a cool story. Talk about something that you love. Like, tell me about like what you care about. I don't want to hear about your like office job that you're not interested in or not passionate about. Like, tell me what you are passionate about. I'd rather talk about that. And so with his friend's blessing, we kind of modified it and started hosting these dinners in the hair studio. And I would invite 4 people who didn't know each other, and he would invite 4 people who didn't know each other.
Amazing. People
were strangers to me, and my friends were strangers to each other, maybe heard about each other. And we would make dinner, which is like hilarious. Obviously, we're not charging people for our food. We just tell people to bring a bottle of wine if they wanted to. We put questions in a hat, basically, like a little basket, and we had icebreaker questions to start, and then we sat down at the table. There were like bit heavy hitter, more like deeper questions.
Yeah.
And from the first time that we hosted one, we were like, there is magic to this format. There's something that's happening when people show up with the intention of sharing with each other, buying into this idea of like, yeah, we're going to talk about stuff deeper than just like Toronto traffic and like our, you know, book club, you know, these sort of things that we get stuck in small talk.
Yeah.
So, and the very first dinner, I remember like sitting around the table an hour in and just being like, how do I do this for the rest of my life? But then also being like, LOL, this is not a job. Like, so from there, we did 15 dinners in a year and a half through 2017. And then I moved to San Francisco. After, like, I met a guy at a wedding, we did long distance, had this whirlwind thing, yada, yada, yada. Moved to San Francisco. I got a real job for the first time in my life and very quickly was like, I'm an artist. It's confirmed. I want to, like, figure out how to make this dinner my job. I know that, like, there's nothing for me in this, like, normal, air quotes, normal, what is normal, like, professional world, and how do I pursue this? And long story short, moved back to Toronto to turn Dinner with Strangers into a business, but that was February 2020. And so then 5 weeks later, COVID started. And then I was really like, oh my goodness, I just blew up my life again after a year and a half. What am I doing? What do I do? And so it's been this long time coming, and relaunched it in September of 2023, officially turning it into a business. And then that's a whole other rocket launch story of like thinking that I was going to have kind of a sandbox of figuring out how to turn this into a business and like host a couple dinners in a year. And I've hosted 32 since last September and had dinner with over 800 strangers since then.
Amazing.
People have just like clung on to the concept and responded so enthusiastically, bigger and wilder than I could have imagined. It's been a very wild ride.
That sounds amazing. And I like how you are so transparent in that you like took breaks, like maybe unintentionally, but like throughout COVID, and now you just relaunched it a year ago. That's typically not the usual trajectory. I also don't want to say usual because building a business doesn't really have like a plan. You don't have a plan to build a business, especially if this is like your first business that you're building. But I think it's interesting that you did take a break and then came back to it, and I think that also is a testament to like how good the idea was and how much of the artist that you truly are, that you believed that it needs to be done no matter if you took some time away from it.
The thing that I always talk about is like well, one, I think I'm an accidental entrepreneur. Like I have entrepreneurial tendencies as far as being like, I'm definitely like a visionary, and I've learned with this project to just go for it. Like even when Ryan and I were talking about it, we kind of had these business meetings at the business meeting. We get together for lunch and be like, what everything that we have, this idea. And it eventually was like, I think we just need to like host a dinner and see what happens. And so that's been a huge lesson of like just taking action on something and trying it out, because I think I can be a muller over of things. And so I've had to learn how to circumvent that and sort of respond outside of my personality trait of like just being like, I'm just gonna try. And on the flip side of that, that also means that I fly by the seat of my pants on a lot of things, which is like both a positive and a negative, or a strength and a weakness. both things have good and bad quality or like shadow sides to them, I guess. But the other thing was that in San Francisco, I think our dreams, like the things that ignite our souls, we think that we're going to have this like perfectly laid out plan and blueprint. But I think that dreams actually show up as like this tiny little light orb in the distance. It's blurry and weird and far off and doesn't make any sense. And all I had was like this like ignited like little tiny flame. I know that there's something to this and I have to respond to it. I had no idea it was going to look like this. And I didn't wait until it took shape. Like I continue to learn from it and I continue to understand more and more what this project is and what it could be and where I would like to take it as I've gone along. I just responded to this tiny light. Like I was like, I know I need to go towards this weird, blurry little thing and I don't even know what it is. And that light carried me through the uncertainty of COVID, I think too, because I was like, I just know that that my heart is responding to this, like that my like spirit and like energy, like there's something to it. So I just have to keep moving towards it.
That's beautifully said. And I can really identify with the podcast of like, it's so true. You have this idea and nothing is laid out on how to figure it out or like what to do or what the first step is to do, but you just know you have to explore it. And I think that is also the wonderful journey of figuring it out, is that you could probably go about it a million different ways, but joy is figuring it all out and having it come to fruition.
Even our first dinner when we were at the hair studio, we prepared, I think, 70 questions or something for 10 people, which is a hilarious amount. But we just were like,
a lot of questions.
How many questions do you ask in a night? We don't know.
Yeah.
And how are people going to get along? And how long do we wait until we sit down? And how long, like, what time do we wrap this up? And there's just things that I'm trying to think, like, what else we plan, like, things that you think that are going to work. And then they just you just, like, in the moment abandon because you're like, no one wants to do this right now. Or, like, the flow is going this way. So, like, you have to be open to, like, changing your vision, both in the moment and hosting sort of things. But, like, things that you think people are going to respond to in the podcast or something too, of going like, there's in any project, there are things that, you can plan all you want. And at the end of the day, things are going to go as they go. They're going to reveal themselves to you.
Yeah. Totally. Well, I think that's a great segue into our next question. And like the concept behind Dinner with Strangers is all about obviously fostering connections through shared meals and stories. So when you were figuring out how to structure these events, how and why did you land on this environment? And I know that Dinner with Strangers is expanding to just with strangers because you don't want to necessarily be only offering dinner events. You want to have other experiences for these opportunities to connect with everyone. So how does it allow people to connect in ways that they might not otherwise?
Yeah, I think there's a few different elements that are like the non-negotiables or sort of like the pillars, I guess, for any event that I do under this sort of with strangers umbrella, which is by taking away talking about work, by taking away this element of talking about work, especially in North America. It's our default first question with people. Our intention with that, we're trying to get a semblance of like a starting off point. When you first meet a person, you're going like, what is our first sort of like little path to getting a conversation rolling? What are sort of like the statistical things that I need to know about you? Who are you? Where did you grow up? But it's funny that we go into statistics kind of instead of like just like starting with open conversation. And this other element is like, whether we know it or not, we do this sort of like social structure or social hierarchy, whether we're willing to say so or are even conscious of it, of like, if you're at a dinner party and you're sitting next to like the person that invented brain surgery or someone who is like a, hometown hero of some sort or did something very impressive or is a celebrity, we ascribe meaning to literally anything that they're going to say around that table versus someone who maybe, is a stay-at-home mom or is whatever, fill in the blank of the things that we as a society compared to the person who invented brain surgery we're going to see as like just a little person in the world or whatever we're going to ascribe to that meaning. Also, we put a lot of identity into our work. I mean, my work obviously is completely infused into my vocation and my like calling in life and the things that I'm passionate about, and is a huge part of my identity. I'm like, do I even have hobbies? I am my work in so many ways. Like I'm infused into my work, but I am so much more than my work. And so even for people who are passionate about their work, it's important to challenge ourselves to define ourselves outside of our job, because that job might be taken away at any point. It's important because we do that hierarchy ranking within a social structure, and it keeps us on surface level talking of just like, so what do you have going on at work and what's hard at work and that sort of thing, instead of like, how are you as a human? How are you navigating your world? What is on your mind? Your question of like, what's the question you're asking yourself right now? Like, what is the thing you're trying to figure out? What is the thing that you're trying to solve? Could be in work, but say someone is like, oh yeah, we're trying to decide if we hire another team. That is real. That is a real struggle, or that is a real challenge that someone's trying to work through. But by you even asking me that at the beginning, if I just talk about work as opposed to like how I'm doing as a person, it keeps it in a safe zone, which is fine in any setting, but also at the end of the day, we are hardwired for connection. And I know from the proof of my work that people are looking for connection and actually feeling quite lonely. And so what people can expect is, by not talking about work and then having spaces where initiating conversation through, I hope, good questions, and put a lot of thought and obviously a lot of like inadvertent research into what makes a good question. Also, this funny thing of like at a With Strangers event, any place that we go in sort of public settings, like a yoga class or a workout class or a pottery build class or wherever we are, or a concert, we are among strangers all the time. Like all of those places are yoga with strangers or a concert with strangers. And yet we have a social contract that like we will hang out with the people that we show up with, and then we will leave with them, and we probably won't interact with the people around us, which is so funny because we have this Venn diagram of like, you like yoga and I like yoga, and we're at the 10 a.m. yoga class. We probably have more things in common. Why are we at a 10 a.m. yoga class? Why can you come during the day? There's probably something else that we have in common. We probably could be friends. Like there's probably something that we could find that makes us friends. Or like if you're at the same concert, it's like, we probably like more of the same bands. You probably are my people. If you're at this concert and I'm at this concert, we probably have other things that are in common. So I hope to kind of break those social constructs as well of like, what does it look like to break the social code of not crossing over into your world and asking about your universe and your reality and what you're up to in the city of Toronto and who you are.
And you mentioned that in total, you've hosted 54 Dinner with Strangers, and that has had nearly 1,000 people at those events. So what are some of the most memorable or transformative moments that you've witnessed at these gatherings? Because I'm sure in each and every event that you've hosted, there's been more than probably one really good nugget or experience that you've seen.
Oh man, well, where do I start? So I mean, it seems like many people are sharing story. People are coming to Dinner with Strangers because some big change has happened in their life. And so people are talking about like just moving to Toronto and not knowing anyone, or like packing up and moving, or like a lot of people who have ended relationships. And so they're in this big like transition period of their life. And so that's been cool that like people come and respond in kind. This woman came in, and I stand at the front and greet everyone. They kind of walk in and they're sort of like, what did I just sign myself up for? And they look nervous. And so I'm the only face that they recognize, obviously. So I'm like, make sure that I'm at the front. Anyway, so I greeted this woman, and she had a cool she had a tattoo on her wrist that said boop, like a little like nose boop.
Yeah, I love that.
And I was like, oh, that tattoo is so cute, and it looked fresh. She said, oh yeah, it's a memorial tattoo for my husband. She said so much in that one sentence, and the tattoo was fresh, and so I could only assume that was probably recent. And I always say at dinner, like, I'm asking these open-ended questions, and like, feel free to answer as you feel comfortable. Like, people have different comfort levels of what they would like to share with a room of complete strangers. And also, if you're someone who's going through something difficult in your life, and everyone in your life knows that you're going through this hard thing, this might be an opportunity for you to be anonymously like not the person who's going through something hard today. So like give yourself permission to like skirt over or be vague in whatever way that you'd like to be in your answers, and we'll respect your vagueness.
Yeah.
And so I said that to her right away at the front. And so as we sat down through dinner and as the questions went on, she was alluding to going through something difficult in her life, but she didn't like outright say like, my husband died this year. And then as we were going along, someone else who was also like, this first woman was like probably like in her 30s, about like approximately. And then someone else also quite young, our age, also shared that her partner died this year. And so the first woman, because the second woman shared first that her husband died, then the woman that with the boob tattoo then shared, my husband actually passed away this year. She said it as like an offering to the other woman who shared this really vulnerable thing, instead of her having to sort of out herself, if that makes sense. And so it was this really profound thing where it was like both women gave each other a gift. Like the woman to talk about her husband passing first was the first one to do the vulnerable thing for the group. And then the woman who shared it second with the boob tattoo offered her, like, you're not alone. I actually know. I don't, you know, every experience is unique and different, but like I'm going through the same thing actually. And so that was obviously incredibly profound to witness. And then, I mean, even this week, like, I had my final event of the year on Friday. Like there were 70 people there. It was like a larger group format, and like kind of playing around with like, what does that look like to be in a giant room, and like mix it, you know, get people to break off into small groups. So I was sort of like, everyone was sort of secretly my guinea pigs, being like, how do I do this with more people, and does it work, and are we having fun, and are people still sharing? And someone made a video afterwards, like posted it on TikTok, about saying like they're trying to put themselves in new experiences and challenge themselves, and to be more vulnerable and show up as themselves. They came to Taste of Dinner with Strangers on Friday and promised themselves that they were just going to be completely themselves, and that like people will accept them as they are, and like what does that feel like to show up as themselves. I mean, I hope that we all show up that way, but it's not like I was like, everyone must be themselves or presented that. I was like, here's a space to gather and meet people, and here's the conversation, like here's what I can offer you, here's the structure that I can give. And she used it as this tool for this like beautiful thing for herself, and I was so moved. I have all these hopes of like what this space can be, but I can't be tied to outcome of every dinner is going to be different. Some dinners are more lighthearted, some people share profound stories, some we get really existential, some are funny, and like all these different things. And so the outcome is always just like, here's this space, what's going to happen, let's see what we create together. And it's the alchemy of everyone who comes together. And maybe it's healing an inner child thing too, of being like insecure that I'm too intense and too much. And so I've had to like step into the acceptance that I'm putting out exactly the thing that I hope to create. I'm creating space for connection, and I need to be unapologetic about that. And that like people are finding that at these events.
Those experiences are really profound, and I'm sure that they'll stay with you forever. But just hearing some of those, I can only imagine how those events are. And I'm really glad that people are taking advantage of the space that you've created and really letting their guard down and using it to its full potential, because that's really what it's all about. Like, of course, there's responsibility on you to run the events and get everything kicked off and keep it moving, but there is responsibility on the people that come. I mean, for sure, it's how everyone wants to use that experience, but I feel like if they're using it to the full extent and being their raw, authentic self, they're going to get the most out of it.
Yeah, and I guess it's a relief. My like broody artist self will be like, no one's gonna be as deep as me or something. In the same way where people are like, Toronto's not the same as it used to be, and people are shallow and everyone's flaky, and it's like, maybe that's true to an extent. And also there are people who are looking to not be flaky, and there are people who are looking to not be shallow, and there are people who are looking to do good in the world, you know. And so yes, it feels like a dumpster fire, but also there are people doing kind, good things all the time. And all of this is about finding your people, I guess. It's like finding the spaces to have the experience that you're looking to have, including what do you want your friendships to look like.
So I want to know if you could have dinner with anyone, which is past or present, anyone who you feel like when you would have a genuine, meaningful conversation with, who would it be and why would you ask them?
It's so funny. People ask me this often, and obviously there are hero writers that I admire, like people professionally who I really admire, or people that I find fascinating. But also from having dinner with 1,000 people almost, I think everyone has a story. And so I don't really care who, like, any table is a beautiful table to be at if people are willing to share their stories. Because as I just listed off stories that happen at dinner, like, there are people who have overcome insane things and people who have pursued incredible things. And like, I think that we all have stories of inspiration and choosing a vulnerable path and changing our minds and things like pursuing our dreams. And the whole purpose of not talking about work is the idea that like we are all on common ground and all the same, and that air quotes normal everyday people have brilliant and remarkable stories to share. I'm trying to think of like famous people or something.
No, that's okay. But I feel like in a way my question was a bit of a trick question, because asking that question, it does set up that like hierarchy that you were talking about, right? Of like, oh, like who's like the most famous person you could pick that sure you would want to have a conversation or a dinner with them, but in a way you would be going into it of like, oh my God, they're like this amazing person, I built them up in my head, versus what you do with strangers of bringing everyone together and we're all on the equal playing field and we're contributing what we want to contribute and not just like the statistics.
I mean, that is something I was talking to the owner of this event space that I host dinner with strangers at, and he was at the TED Talk conference. And TED Talk, if you're listening, I'd like to talk to you, because so they already do a dinner at the TED Talk conference on like whatever the Thursday night or whatever day it is, and he's like, I'm at a table with like Neil deGrasse Tyson, but we're all supposed to be normal or whatever. Like we're all these high achieving people or whatever. Yeah. But I want to talk to Neil deGrasse Tyson. I want to like shoot the shit with Neil deGrasse Tyson, but also ask like, when was a time you were in over your head, or when was a time that you faked it till you made it? And it's like, if you make the whole table a level playing field instead of like singling out being like, you're the most famous person, Neil, that's like, wow, I want to talk to you. It's like, how do we, in any, whether it's a celebrity or a high achieving person, when we put anyone on any type of pedestal, then all of a sudden we become less human, even though it's important to celebrate, like, obviously this person has like incredible wisdom or insight to share with us, that like at the end of the day we're all just humans, and we're all included, like the name of your podcast of like, nobody knows anything. Like you literally talk to any of these like high achieving people. For sure. And so it's that context with anyone is how I would want to talk to anyone who I sit down at dinner with, is like, are you willing to talk to me about the things that you don't know about? Or are you willing to talk about the times that you like totally fumbled the ball? Because I think that talking about the spaces of like our current pain points, or the things that we're wrestling with, or the things that we've messed up, like that's the area that like is universal, even though what Neil deGrasse Tyson has struggled with like looks different than my life. But I'm sure that he and we could learn from each other if we can get to that human place where we're like that literal like breaking of bread and like breaking of barriers and sharing with each other. Really cool.
I want to go back to when it was 2018 and you were in San Francisco, and that's when you were working for a tech billionaire, and you had the idea, I think you were working for 3 weeks, and you're like, this is not for me, the corporate life is not for me, and you wanted to pursue With Strangers fully. What was it about that experience that really solidified your commitment to this project?
Feeling like my soul died.
Yeah. Probably. That's a good one. That'll do it.
My boyfriend at the time got me a job as the receptionist at the startup that he worked at. And so that was the three weeks in being like, thank you so much for this job. I hate it. It was like, what am I doing here? And I was vastly underqualified for any sort of practical job. I had only worked in restaurants, and like literally the first day before my first receptionist day or whatever, my boyfriend taught me how to send a Google Calendar invite. Like I had a paper agenda. Like we're talking like only soft skills, no hard skills. Like could barely send it. I mean, I knew how to send an email, but even then I was like, LOL, I always forget to reply all. Isn't that charming? And it's like, no, like, how are you a receptionist doing any admin work? That job it was a startup and it ran out of funding. It was a very quintessential San Francisco experience. Yes. And then, 5 weeks in, had a very harrowing conversation with my boyfriend of being like, I know I moved here to like get out of the restaurant industry and like become an adult, but like actually I'm an artist. Like I'm a writer and there's something to this dinner thing. I think I need to like scale this back and get a part-time serving job. I'll make more than I was making as a receptionist and meet some people and like figure out the like hosting hospitality thing. And that freaked him out, I think, because it was like not the pretenses that I like moved there for. You know, he's like, who are, I thought this is what you wanted. So he was overwhelmed. I mean, it was like just a high stakes, crazy thing. This chapter of the conversation is called What It Means to Have a Whirlwind Long Distance Romance and Move Somewhere High Stakes After 6 months. These are the things that come up, the lessons, the crash course of life that happens. Anyway, so my boyfriend, Alex was his name. We can use his name. That's fine. Yeah. He was like, I think it's important that we have the same schedule. He was a very steady, but like stable, but like straight and narrow. Yeah. He was like climbing the corporate ladder and like doing the thing and like saving for a house and very sturdy, steady person. And so me being like, I'm going to flip the script and I want to be a floaty artist was like, I thought this was not the thing that I signed up for, sort of thing. Anyway, I had just enough work experience from my brief stint as a receptionist to get this job with this angel investor tech guy. And then so all of a sudden I was catapulted into this world of like, it was basically Shark Tank every day, like all of these pre-seed round baby, like recent Stanford grads being like trying to invent the next Airbnb and like being like, we're the Netflix of oat milk and we're the like Uber of diaper genies and like all this like surveillance tech and robots and AI and like the future. Like I was like a fly on the wall to these like crazy meetings and driving the Tesla home from the airport and like booking private planes, driving to the Sonoma house and picking their kids up from dance class. And I know when I'm like 85 years old, it's going to be like, LOL, remember that 1 year I spent, which is totally the most, like, how did I get plucked out of Canada playing in like an indie synth band thing in my 20s to like being in these rooms with these people. So, but it was also volatile and you're like, paid to be available all the time and I would wake up at 5:30 and like check my inbox right away. You're always on, you're always answering emails, you're always like getting a call at 11 p.m. being like, oh, we're not actually leaving Vietnam, can you fly us to the Philippines instead, and we're going to Croatia on our way back, and can you call the founder of Twitter, and like we're getting on his yacht in the Mediterranean, wherever, and just crazy things, both again like cool and not cool all at the same time. and I'm just not in my skill set. I had this moment, in Devil Wears Prada, where Emily Blunt has the binder and she's like whispering in, being like, that's this person, they started this thing. So before they would go to a conference, I would research all the guests and all the speakers and be like, oh, you both play golf, or your daughters both are in dance class, or like here are conversation starters that you have. Here's the latest thing that they're working on. Also, here's the weather, here's how you should pack, here's your like travel itinerary, and making this huge like 50-page document for like a weekend trip for my boss. Sure. And I had this moment where I was like, if I could do this perfectly, if I really blew this out of the water and just did like 100 out of 10, the best travel doc that's ever been created, and I got like a gold star and all of the accolades that you could get for doing this task just above and beyond, any of those accolades would feel like nothing because I don't care about it. Like I want to be someone who does their job well, but I don't care about it. It doesn't mean anything to me. Not that it's about gold star or recognition, just like what is fulfillment of like the work that we do. Although not everyone feels that way about work, so I will put that caveat on it. But it was just this moment of like, I'm not gonna ever feel fulfilled by anything shiny about this job or anything motivating about it, of like the cool meetings and how dynamic it was, or the stability of it also. Like, none of it was motivating for me. And so I was like, I know that I need to go towards that weird blurry orb. Like, I just have to answer the call to that.
Yeah, I love it. It was like your aha moment in a way of just being like, okay, this is not it for me and I need to pivot or answer your calling or what you were dreaming about. So you've spoken before about the importance of building meaningful relationships. How do you think the pressure to succeed in our careers can sometimes interfere with making genuine connections in our late 20s and early 30s? Of course, it doesn't have to be specific to age, but I do find when we're in our late 20s and early 30s, we're so career motivated. Like, we've had a little bit of career under our belt and we're still pining for like the next point in our career, as well as we're losing friends. Like, our circles get smaller and smaller, so that loneliness creeps in, and that need for connection also comes about.
Yeah, I think that has to do with, like, on a broader subject, is like sort of like that's sort of like a journey versus destination, or sort of like getting to the next rung of a ladder versus like the in process of that. Or, you know, literally like, I'll sleep when I'm dead, or I will rest when, or I will feel proud of myself if I buy a house, or when I get to get this title at work, or when do we let ourselves take a break even. There will always be something to chase. And we have to like find pockets of reprieve and rest and celebration, like celebrating ourselves, and also relationship in the midst of that. Because also our jobs, like COVID taught us that like we can plan all we want and think that our lives are going in a certain trajectory, and like the universe will really pull the rug from under us. We're relational creatures, and like work is stressful and life is stressful, and like we need to cultivate the friendships that are important in our world. And that doesn't have to be a million people. And being, you know, I can speak to my year of like, I feel like I've been a crappy friend in a way this year, of like, I have very, very small pockets of time actually to spend with my friends. I'm busy spending time with strangers, and, you know, but cultivating those and investing in those relationships are so important, because they are the thing that makes us feel connected and not isolated, and the people that we ask for help from, and who we let steam off with, and who also let us know that we're not alone in the things that are stressing us out. With that, I think obviously in this time in our lives, in our 20s and 30s, where like low maintenance friendships, or like friendships where you navigate what that looks like to be connected and staying in touch. And as that ebbs and flows, like friends who understand like that you need to go to bed by 11 p.m. or that you can't go out every single Friday, or whatever the boundaries that you're putting on yourself to pursue the thing. If you are in a place where you're like prioritizing work and prioritizing leveling up, or whatever the thing is, that like if your friends are being like, oh man, you're a bad friend because you're not staying out and partying, or like you should stay for another drink, like that's also not a supportive friend who's like supporting you in the direction of your dreams too. So like friends know that like I have a bedtime, and that like I opt out of things but still want to be invited, or that like I'll say like, oh my gosh, like I can meet with you in 3 weeks, and that's like the best I can do. Does that work for you? I send messages being like, hi, I love you, I literally can't catch up. And it's like a duality of like prioritizing. For me, like I need to prioritize the relationship and also asking for understanding. In those
beautiful
seasons of busyness.
Yeah, for sure. Moving into the dialogue that you typically foster at your events, what are your favorite conversation starter questions that you would say are not cliche or overdone? Or maybe what questions do you think don't really foster a meaningful conversation?
As an intro round question for people, I often will start with something as simple as like, what are you excited about lately? And tell people that it's like the lower the stakes, the better. of like, oh, I just started binge watching whatever the latest show
Yeah.
is. Or that gets people talking about like, people are like, oh, I just started a garden, or like, I just joined a book club, or I'm going to see my sister this weekend who lives in Portland. And people are like, oh my gosh, I'm from Portland. And so even something as simple as like, yeah, what's the thing you're excited about? Yeah, literally asking like, what currently, start us in the current moment of like something that you're excited about. And that gets you finding out like, oh, someone goes to it, they're talking about movies, they're a movie buff, they're going to a ton of movies. That's cool. It's funny because I think we ask these types of questions again of like attempting to get statistics on people of like, are you single? Where do you live? What do you do for work? We'll ask like, what's your favorite movie of all time? And in a way, that movie or that question is like an identity question of like, define yourself to me.
Yeah.
And that question, first of all, I forget every movie title that I've ever heard of in my entire life. And also I'm like, oh, depending on what movie I pick, is it making me sound artsy enough? Or is it making me sound, do I sound cool? Do I sound basic if I choose this movie over that movie? Instead of saying like, have you seen any good movies lately? And then I'm like, oh, I saw this one. It just takes the pressure off of it. Yeah. And then you'll learn the latest movie I saw, or maybe I haven't seen a movie in a month. And then it's like, well, why haven't you seen a movie in a month? And you're like, well, I've been doing this instead. And it opens it up to actually finding out what that person does with their time. Because it's like, maybe we'll talk about a movie that we both have seen and we can riff off that. But the bigger thing that I'm asking is like, can you share something about yourself? Yeah. Like you care about is what I'm actually asking when I say like, what movies do you like? So yeah, I try and ask specific questions that are like low stakes that get people talking about something that they care about. And if I can, that like trick people into also not bragging about something, but like sharing about something that they love or that they are passionate about without it being like, what are you passionate about? Tell me right now. It's like, that's a heavy question, but asking it in a way that kind of takes the pressure valve off of it. I asked one dinner if we were planning a heist, what would your role in the heist be? And that was such a funny question to ask. Like people were like, oh, I'd drive the getaway car, but I'd also mess it up because I'd be blaring the music too loud. And then someone was like, I'm in the control room. I know the plan A to Z. I know your plan. I know what your role is. And I'm like, I trust you with my life. Immediately was like, take us to this place or whatever. So getting people to kind of talk about their personality type is an interesting question. I'll sometimes ask like, what is your friendship superpower? And that question was funny. I asked like in February, both the dinners that I hosted were relationship themed. So I asked both groups, and the first group was full of type A people. Like everyone was like, I know when your plane lands. I know I'm in charge of the group text. I'm always the one who makes the reservation. And I was like, I need all you people in my life. And then the second dinner was like overwhelmingly like sort of the floaty, like, I'm the friend you call and like talk about your feelings with, or talk about your like, like I'm the listening ear. And so that was really funny because obviously I don't vet or play puppeteer with like who comes to which dinner. And it was just funny that naturally each dinner sort of self-selected into like different, like the same personality type, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so, for sure. Do you have a question that like someone has asked you that's always stuck with you, or like a question that's like you've been sort of taken aback, being like, wow, that's a really good question? And it's okay if you don't. I just have wondered because you probably get asked a lot of questions all the time. So I just wondered if there's been one that's really stuck with you.
I think I've been working with a coach, and so obviously he's like great
for sure
at, like, being a mirror of. But I feel like obviously those are such like personal.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, I can be quite analytical or feel like I have to justify. I'm like a deeply feeling person, but I feel like I have to like justify being someone with big feelings. So I do a ton of analyzing and like the mind map sort of thing. Yeah. And my therapist my first therapist that I worked with would always, she'd kind of let me riff for a bit. Like I would just sort of like word vomit all the like shoulds at her and all of the things I was trying to like balance and contort into making people please and all this stuff. And after a while she'd stop me and say like, okay, and if we like march that into your body, what do you want to do? Like, what do you think? What is your body saying? And then everything would get really still and really clear. All of a sudden it'd be like a one-word answer of like, I don't want to do that thing. Or I don't want to date that person anymore. Like it would just be like
Right.
clarity would come
I
from
love
that.
that though.
Yeah.
I definitely identify with that because I am the same of like people pleasing or crafting myself to be in alignment with whoever I'm in the room with, or like I definitely feel off of other people's energy. I don't like using the term empath, but I can read people really well and then have the problem of like I shape shift into like what they want or like what would appease them,
Mm-hmm.
even if it is at jeopardy of me and like what I believe in or like anything,
Mm-hmm.
something like I'm trying to work with. But I like that question of like marching all that back into like your body and like how you would react to that. And it is so simple, like, oh, I wouldn't do that, or I don't like that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. People ask me often, like, okay, if we're not starting with what do you do for work? Like, how do we start conversations then?
Yeah.
Game recognizes game, kind of when I meet a new person and they're like, so Jess, like, what are you passionate about? And they ask that instead of like, what do you do for work? I think your start off question of like, what are you asking yourself, or asking a version of that of like, what's consuming you right now, or like tell me where you're at, like let's land in where are you at right now, I think is like
Yeah.
a great place to start with people, like will you let me into your world and like let me
Yeah.
know kind of what's on your mind, like what's sort of like the thing that's like you're working through. So I
For
always love
sure.
when people ask me that, and I know that they've like read that somewhere, that they're like intentionally not asking me what I do for work. So
Right.
I'm always like,
Yes.
yes, I like this. Let's
No,
talk
it's a
about that.
nice feeling. It's a good feeling, especially right now because I am unemployed. I lost my job in October. Like before, obviously, I was so in the mindset of like, what do people do, or like wanting to talk about my job. But now I'm very cognizant of like, oh, well, I don't really want to tell people I'm unemployed, even though that's like one of the first things I like word vomit out because I feel like I
Mm.
just have to be like, they're gonna ask me anyway, so I like want to like
Mm.
get around it. But I love the idea of when people actually like don't care about that, or they want to ask you what you're passionate about, or like
Right.
what are you currently loving in life, or what gets you
Yeah.
excited. I would feel so much more comfortable if someone were to ask me that.
Yeah. I had this conversation last night. People every once in a while will say something like, how are you still single? Or they'll like ask about my singleness all the
Yeah.
time. Or even just to say like, so Jess, are you single? Like, are you dating anyone? And I'm like, no, I'm single. And it's like a question that like doesn't lead anywhere, or like also
Yeah.
is kind of interrogative too, where you're like
Yeah.
unintentionally, but it's still a question that like drives me up the wall. Here's like a very vulnerable example of this. My aunt was kind of the fifth member of my nuclear family, and she was my mom's older sister. My mom had us really young, and my sister and I are really close in age, and so my aunt would come up every weekend, and
Yeah.
she was there on Christmas Eve, and part of our, like very much like, yeah, just a fifth. She was an aunt, but more than an aunt. She was my aunt. She was Mimi.
Yeah.
So she was in the ICU for a week before she passed away in a coma. So I was there with my mom in Seattle. This chaplain came in and asked if he could pray for us, and we we were sort of like, that'd be not, whatever. We were like, sure. But he goes, is she married? And we said no. And he said, does she have kids? And it was just, I mean, I went mute, and I was like, I'm not her kid, but how do I explain to him what I am? Like, I belong to her. It's like
Yeah.
really the answer. His question was so insufficient, even though it's just like this 3-minute interaction. He was very well meaning and kind and,
For sure.
whatever. But he missed out on this opportunity to ask this, like, if he had asked and said, who are the people who are most important to her? He would
Yeah.
have gotten an actual accurate depiction of who
Yeah.
Mimi was, instead of like, not married, no kids.
Yeah.
It's like, who is she and who cares about her and who's going to like miss her when she's gone? And so I think about that in the like statistics, married, no kids, what's your job? Of saying like, if someone asked me like, what are you learning about love this year? Or like, what have you learned about love lately?
Right.
Is a completely different conversation than like, oh, you're not dating anyone. What's up with dating? You start like, you keep it surfacey of like talking about like online dating or whatever, instead of like,
Yeah.
oh, what are you learning about love, or what are you learning about singleness, or what are you learning about yourself, or what are you learning about partnership or just solitude or that sort of thing. And so it's so funny that by like shifting the way that we ask a question changes sort of without knowing it, we're choosing what door we're inviting people into.
Yeah.
maybe people are like, might hear that and be like, you're taking this way too seriously. But I'm like, yes,
But it's
I do
not.
take these questions that seriously.
I don't think it is, because you're so right. It's almost like pick your journey. And coming from a communications major, there's so much power in language and like how we converse with other people. And you're so right with the example with your Mimi, and then also with people asking you, how are you single? It puts you in the wrong of like, okay, you're single, but they're intentionally saying that's your fault, and how come that hasn't been solved? Do you know what I mean when they ask that type of question?
Yeah. Well, and it also is like suggesting that a relationship is a reward for being a cool person. And also that they're like, you seem very cool, therefore
there's something
you should
wrong.
be scooped up. So there must be a secret reason why you're like that.
Exactly.
I'm not seeing, like, solve this for me.
Oh my God. Yeah. And as like someone who is chronically single my entire life, I've just now been in a long-term relationship for the past 3 years, but this is the first in my entire life. Like, I got that question all the time. Yeah. And I could always feel when my guard would go up when people would ask me that. Because like then I felt like I had to justify to them, kind of like how you were talking about, like word vomiting, all the things that, like, proving to them why I'm a good person, even though that like has nothing to do with me and being single. Like, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, that's a whole other, that's like our next podcast.
Yeah, that's another episode.
Single in our 30s.
In the future, for sure. But this ties very well into the next question of how has your own perspective on identity and connection shifted over time, especially as you've navigated different cities and communities. And I had another sort of follow-up question to that of like, you are running this business that's about fostering connection, but at the end of the day, it is a business. And so how do you make sure that like your work doesn't really compete with you having your own pockets of connection and time for yourself?
Yeah, it's funny because obviously as the project continues and grows, the job gets more solidified and the work gets more intense, and then it therefore becomes a bigger part of my identity as the thing grows. And then it's this funny thing where it's like all of it is about like, how do we become more human, and how do we become human even with people we don't know well. And then also a layer of like, people are like, wow, it's so cool because you're fostering community. And I'm like, I'm actually not building a community because you hit reset every dinner. Like, it's not like it's a yoga studio or a gym or whatever, where it's a third space where people are like, come to this thing and keep coming weekly, or come 3 times a week and you're going to meet the same people and we're like doing life together. It's like this one-off in a way, you know, and there's repeat people. Yeah. It's awesome. But going, what does this look like to do this in community? And that's a different thing than what Dinner with Strangers is as it stands right now, which is part of moving into the with strangers thing of having different offerings where it's like this larger community and like different spaces where people can show up and continually meet monthly, different pockets in different spaces with different activities. And I think that's part of this examining of solitude too, of going like, who am I outside of my work? The thing that's tricky about this project too is like, I was doing 2 dinners a month, sometimes 3 dinners a month all year this year. So people are coming to make connections, but they're also like not only looking to me, but hoping to connect with me and wanting to be my friend. And I am making friends through this, but also I can't have 50 new friends every single, it's just like not sustainable to like stay in close contact with everyone. And so that's been something to wrestle with, is like the human behind the hosting, and kind of going like, no, you guys connect with each other and I want to connect and hear your stories, but also I can't keep up. And that's been something that's been hard to wrestle with as like a component of this work.
For sure.
And then also wrestling with like this other side of my work of also being a writer, which is very solitary work, and going like, what does it mean? I don't know. What does it mean to be a friend? I feel like I've been a bad friend this year in a lot of ways of like, or just an unavailable friend, I guess. That's in flux, or that's a question that I'm asking, is like, how do I maintain Jess as a person? And as I pursue this thing that I'm deeply passionate about, and like, it's something that I want to implement into my everyday life, is asking better questions. And like, even that of like, when I'm writing, like, am I out in the community and am I initiating conversations with strangers not just when I'm at the helm facilitating in a formal setting. Am I actually practicing community and connection, even in small ways of like talking to my barista and like asking how her week is going, or like who are the people in the regular third spaces that I occupy that I can connect with in a more meaningful way.
Before we wrap up, I want to look ahead to the future of With Strangers and your new journey. You alluded to this a little bit with your writing path, but you are writing a book. So I want to know what's next for you. You can talk about the book, or if there's any new ideas or projects on the horizon that you are excited to explore.
Yeah, I got a book deal in October of this year, which was
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been crazy. Like that's been
For sure.
its own. Like it's taken a year and a half, and I've written 3 different book proposals, and this is the one that's stuck, and it's called The Table Where We Meet. So it's stories from dinner. So that question of like, what experiences have you had or lessons have you witnessed? Like essays literally about that, of like, profound things that I've learned about myself and about community and about belonging and about connection, and also just cool stories that other people have told that I have learned from and grown from. And there was something that your second part of your last question that relates to this, of like looking ahead in 2025 and beyond. I'm looking at the balance of that, like finding the balance of that. And so part of that is like looking at the dinner itself. I'm making the group size smaller for the dinner after running it with 23 guests, so it's 24 including me at the table, because since I started it in September, being like, how do I make this affordable? How do I make this affordable for the guest? How do I pay for food? How do I pay myself in order to continue to host this and make some sort of salary or something, like make some money? And so that's been a weird thing to reconcile, because overhead for a dinner is very expensive. Yeah. When I look at Jess Janz as an enterprise, it's just weird that it's like me as a person, or With Strangers, sort of this umbrella. It's like Dinner with Strangers is I keep calling it like Dinner with Strangers is like an orange within an orchard. When you have something that's magical like that, you go like, how do we monetize, or how do we capitalize on the orange? Like, what do we make from the orange? We're making orange juice. We could do something with the pulp. We could do something with the skin. We could do something with the like scent of it, or like make oil and candles or whatever. My life's work is asking questions and creating spaces for connection, and asking, what does it mean for us to actually meet each other? Hi, I'm like shaking your hand, I'm introducing myself. What does it actually mean if I were to introduce myself? And what are the things that I put onto my identity? And what does it mean for us to actually meet, versus just like, oh, we had an interaction and we exchanged some facts about ourselves? Like, what does it mean to like meet each other? And in that body of work, within that body of work, because now I get to write a book, and because I'm working on a card deck right now, I'm hoping to release that early 2025. And then having these other events, it takes the pressure valve off of like the dinner itself being profitable, which I know sounds really counterintuitive, but it's basically like the heartbeat and the proof of concept of all of this work. And it makes, it frees me up to make integrity-based choices on it, of like having it be exactly the experience that I want it to be, as opposed to like, okay, but how do I pay for it, and how do I pay myself through it? So I'm making these like kind of funny, like counterintuitive business decisions on it, of going like, I want the dinner to stay really precious and really exclusive. These other sort of branches of my work allow me to keep dinner as this like intimate human experience, and not even a job wherein I'm actually making money from the dinner itself. I'm like making, like my job or my income comes from these other kind of sources. So lastly, I would love it if you could tell listeners where everyone can find you. Yeah. My personal Instagram and website are both at Jess Janz, jessjanz.com. And then anything With Strangers, including Dinner with Strangers, is at With Strangers Co. And the website is with-strangers.co. So that is where all the info happens. Obviously, wanting people to know what's going on. So anything that is going on will be posted to all of those places. Beautiful. Perfect. And I'll also include it in the show notes too, so listeners can check it out there as well.